The wind came down from the Wind River Range like something with teeth. Sharp, cold, mean. Adeline Whitfield stepped off the train at Eagle Rock Depot. She held two small bundles against her chest. Her arms ached. Her fingers had gone numb an hour past Cheyenne. The babies, all of them. Quiet now. Too quiet. She had practiced this moment for 600 miles. Practiced the words, the smile, the way she would stand when he saw her. Except she could not remember any of it now, because the man in the long black coat was already walking toward her. And his eyes had stopped on the bundles in her arms before they ever reached her face. "Mr. Renshaw," she said, soft, cautious. He did not answer right away. He just looked. At Ruth, at Samuel, at the small worn carpet bag at her feet, then back at her. "You have children," he said, loud enough for the whole platform to hear. The other passengers slowed. The conductor turned. A boy holding a newspaper stopped pretending to read it. "They are not my children, sir." Her voice, smaller than she had wanted. "They are my sisters. I wrote to you. In April, in June, twice in August. I wrote about the babies in every letter." Silas Renshaw smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I never received a single letter mentioning children, Miss Whitfield." The wind cut across the platform. Snow began to come down sideways. A woman in a fur collar pulled her shawl tighter and whispered something to her husband. "I cannot marry a woman who arrives with another man's responsibilities," Silas said. His voice carried. He wanted it to carry. "I agreed to a wife. I did not agree to a ready-made family." The cold went all the way through her then, through the wool, through the linen, through whatever piece of her had still believed in this day. She tried again. "Sir, please, just allow me a moment." He stepped back as if she carried sickness. "Find your way home, Miss Whitfield." He turned, walked, did not look back. His boots cracked through the new snow. She stood there with her sister's babies and a town watching her like she was a thing in a glass case. Ruth woke first. Small whimper, the kind that meant a bigger cry was coming. Samuel followed. Addie shifted them in her arms and bent her head down. She made a soft, hushing sound her sister Margaret had taught her 3 months ago. Before Margaret had died. "It is all right," she whispered. "It is all right, my loves. We will figure something out. We will." She did not know what. She had $11 and a comb to her name. She had a return ticket she could not afford to use because there was nowhere to return to. She had a child on each arm and a town full of strangers and a sky turning to iron over her head. So she stood there, because what else was there to do? Until the wind made her eyes water, and her teeth chatter, and her legs began to shake under her skirts. A woman in a heavy gray coat stepped out from the depot doorway then. She was older, maybe 60, strong-looking, hair the color of pewter pulled back in a tight bun, hands that had clearly worked a lifetime. She crossed the platform without hurrying. She came to stand directly in front of Addie, close enough that her body blocked the wind. "Child," the woman said, "you are going to freeze to death standing here." Addie tried to answer. Could not. The woman did not wait. She took the bag from the ground in one hand and put her other hand under Addie's elbow. "Come with me," she said, "right now, before the cold takes you." "I do not have," Addie began. Her throat closed. "I do not have any money to pay for a room." "I did not ask you about money." The woman steered her off the platform, down 2 wooden steps, across the street. A wide painted sign hung from chains above a porch. Green's boarding house. Hot meals. Clean beds. The door opened to warm air and the smell of stew. Addie nearly fell. The woman caught her elbow tighter. Easy. Easy now. Inside. Lamplight. A fire in a stone hearth. The smell of bread. The smell of cinnamon. The smell of life. Mabel Green. That was the name on the sign behind the front desk. She walked Addie past the parlor and into a small back kitchen where a kettle hissed on a black iron stove. She pointed at a wooden chair near the fire. Sit. Addie sat. The babies, suddenly aware they were warm, began to cry properly. Mabel did not flinch. She pulled a basket from a high shelf and lined it with a quilt and a clean folded sheet. She set the basket on the kitchen table, took Samuel from Addie's left arm, laid him gently in the basket, and went back for Ruth without a word. Then she put a tin cup of warm milk into Addie's hands. Drink that, all of it, before you say a single word. Addie drank. The warmth went down into her chest and broke something open in there. She started to cry. She tried to stop. She could not stop. Mabel did not say anything. She just kept moving around the kitchen, stirring a pot, cutting bread, putting a kettle back on, letting Addie cry the way a person cries when they have been holding it in since their sister died. After a long while, Addie wiped her face with the back of her hand and tried to speak. "I do not know what to do," she said. "You eat first," Mabel said. "Then we talk. That is the order." She set a bowl of beef stew in front of Addie and a plate with 2 thick slices of bread and a pat of butter. Addie ate. She had not realized how hungry she was. She had not eaten properly since Omaha. Mabel sat down across from her with a cup of black coffee. She waited. When the bowl was empty, she said, "Now." Addie set her spoon down, folded her hands in her lap the way the sisters at the orphanage school had taught her. "My name is Adeline Whitfield. I came from Pittsburgh, my sister Margaret. She died 3 months ago. Consumption. She left 2 babies and a husband who had already been killed in a coal mine collapse the year before." Mabel listened. She did not interrupt. "I hired a wet nurse from the neighborhood with the last of my sister's savings. She came twice a day for 3 months. He said one woman could not raise 2 infants alone, and a man should not waste good money trying." Mabel's mouth tightened. "So I answered an advertisement," Addie said, "in a paper from a Mr. Silas Renshaw of Eagle Rock, Wyoming. He said he wanted a wife. He said he was a merchant. He said he would welcome a family. I wrote to him about the babies. I wrote about them in every single letter. He wrote back saying he understood. He said children were a blessing in a young country." She paused, looked at Mabel. "He told me to use my own passage money. He said he would reimburse me when I arrived. I took my late sister's savings, and I bought 3 tickets, and I came. And now," Mabel said quietly, "and now," Addie said, "I am here with $11 and 2 babies and nowhere to go." Mabel was silent for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked across the kitchen, reached into a tin on the high shelf and took out a folded paper, brought it back, set it on the table in front of Addie. It was a newspaper clipping. A column titled, "Notices of Marriage," listed in it, October 1876, Mr. Silas Renshaw of Eagle Rock to Miss Cordelia Brewster of St. Louis. Addie stared. She stared and stared and stared. "He is married," she said. The words sounded strange in her own mouth. "He is already married." "For 2 years," Mabel said. Cordelia is the daughter of a railway man. Has more money than God and twice the meanness. They live in the big white house at the end of Pine Street. Then why? Addie began. Could not finish. Why does he keep advertising for brides? Mabel said. Because he is not the one advertising, child. She is. Addie did not understand. Mabel sat down again. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. You are not the first, she said. You are the fifth. In 2 years, 5 young women have come off that train carrying nothing but a carpet bag and a letter. The first was named Mary Sue Holloway. She arrived in the spring of '77. She was 20 years old. What happened to her? 3 weeks after she arrived, Mabel said, her boarding house caught fire. She did not get out. Addie put both hands flat on the table. The second one made it back home. The third was sent away by her brother who came to fetch her. The fourth went to work for a saloon in Cheyenne because she had no other choice. And now you. Why? Addie said again. Her voice was a whisper now. Why would anyone do this? Money, Mabel said. Your passage money. Whatever savings you carried, whatever wedding goods you brought. Most of you girls bring everything you have. She takes what she can get, and her husband makes sure you do not stay in town long enough to ask questions. Addie felt sick. She thought of her sister's savings. $27. Gone. She thought of the small chest in the room she had paid to have shipped. Margaret's wedding china. Her mother's silver thimble. The only things she had left of any of them. Where is my chest? She said. Where would they have sent it? Mabel's eyes went sharp. Renshaw's storehouse. Behind his shop. He takes delivery of every freight box that comes through this depot. Addie stood up, sat down again because her legs would not hold. I have to. You do not have to do anything tonight, Mabel said. Tonight you sleep. Tonight the babies sleep. Tomorrow we begin to think. She rose and added another log to the stove. The fire crackled. She stood there looking into the small mouth of light. In the morning, she said, I am going to send word up the mountain. Addie looked at her. Up the mountain to who? To the Calloway brothers. Addie did not know that name yet. She would know it before noon the next day, because the Calloways were already in town. They had been in the back of the crowd at the depot. They had seen everything, and the eldest of them, the one with the burnt amber eyes. He had not been able to walk away from what he saw. That night, Addie slept in a small upstairs room, with the babies in a borrowed cradle beside the bed. The cradle had been Mabel's grandson's. The quilt over Addie smelled like cedar and dried sage. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and thought about Margaret. She thought about her sister's hand in hers at the end, the way Margaret had said, Promise me, Addie. Promise me they will have a mother. She had promised. She had not known what she was promising into. And now here she was, in a strange town, in a strange bed, with strangers downstairs. Except they did not feel like strangers. Not really. Mabel had brought her bread and milk and a quilt that smelled like cedar, so maybe strangers was not the right word. Maybe the right word was just people. People who decided to be kind for no reason at all. She fell asleep before she could finish the thought. Morning came pale and bright and cruel as glass. Addie woke to the sound of 2 babies who had decided the world should know they were hungry. She fed them, changed them, dressed herself in the same gray traveling dress because it was all she had that was clean, pinned her hair up the way her mother had taught her when she was 8. Then she carried the babies downstairs. Mabel was in the kitchen with a man, a very large man. He had to duck when he stood up from the kitchen chair. Tall, did not cover what he was. Tall and broad and quiet. The kind of quiet that came from spending years where no one ever spoke, unless something needed saying. He was perhaps 33. His hair was dark brown with streaks the color of caramel where the sun had touched it. His eyes were the color of amber held up to firelight. 3-day beard. A weather-worn face that had clearly been handsome once and was now something deeper than handsome. He did not smile when he saw her, but he did stand all the way up, like a man being introduced to someone who mattered. "Miss Whitfield," Mabel said, "this is Jonah Calloway." He came down from the ridge this morning when he heard. Addie stood very still. When he heard what? What happened to you yesterday? Jonah did not look at Addie's face. He looked at the babies. First Ruth, then Samuel, then somewhere just past Addie's shoulder. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, slow, the kind of voice that did not waste itself on anything. "Mr. Calloway." He cleared his throat once, looked at his boots, looked back up. "My brothers and I have a place a half-day's ride up Iron Creek. Cabin and a ranch house. The cabin is empty, has been empty for 2 years. It has a stove and a bed and clean water from a spring 20 feet from the door. The roof does not leak." He stopped, like that was the speech he had practiced on the ride down. Mabel poured coffee, said nothing. "You and the children could winter there," Jonah said, "until spring, until you decide what comes next." Addie's mouth opened, closed. "Mr. Calloway, that is more kindness than." He shook his head once, sharp. "There is no kindness in it, Miss Whitfield. The cold up here will kill a woman alone with 2 babies inside a week. I am not interested in watching that happen." "But your wife," Addie began. "Your family." "They will. My wife is dead," he said, flat, quiet. 2 years this December. My brothers and I live in the main house. The cabin is separate. 100 yards from us, across the yard. You would have a door that locks. You would have your privacy. We would not enter unless asked." Addie did not know what to say. She was a 24-year-old unmarried woman. She had grown up under the eyes of nuns and aunts and church ladies. She had been taught to fear exactly this kind of arrangement. 3 men, a mountain, no witnesses, except Mabel was watching her with calm gray eyes, and Mabel had known him longer than 2 minutes, and Mabel was not afraid. "You can trust him, child," Mabel said. "I have known Jonah Calloway since he was a boy of 9, who came into this kitchen with his mother to barter eggs for sugar. His father was the most honorable man this town ever saw. Raised those 3 boys to be the same." Jonah's jaw moved once at the mention of his father. He did not look up. "You do not have to decide now," he said. "I will be down in town until midday. I have feed and salt to load. If you decide to come find me at the freight dock, if you decide to stay here, Mabel will keep you. I have already left her enough money to cover 3 months of room and board." Addie's head jerked. "You did what?" He shrugged one shoulder, like it was nothing. "Mabel runs a business. A business does not run on charity. Whichever way you decide, you and those children are not going to go cold or hungry this winter. That is the end of it." He picked up his hat off the table. He turned to go. At the doorway he paused, looked back, just for a second. "Ma'am," he said, "I am sorry for what happened to you yesterday. There are good people in this town. Renshaw is not one of them." And then he was gone. The kitchen door swung shut. The latch clicked. Addie stared at the place where he had stood. Mabel sipped her coffee. "That," Mabel said quietly, "is the closest thing to a speech I have heard Jonah Calloway give in 5 years." Addie sat down slow, slid into the chair. Ruth fussed in her arm, and she absently began to rock her. "Tell me about him," she said. Mabel took her time. His mother died when he was 12. His father raised 3 boys alone after that. Made them into men, the kind that work with their hands and keep their word and finish what they start. Jonah is the oldest, took over the ranch when the old man passed. "And his wife," Addie said. "Careful. Cora," Mabel said. "Cora Calloway. She was a doctor's daughter from Boston, came out west with her brother to teach school in Cheyenne, and met Jonah at a harvest dance when he was 29. They were married within the year. He built that cabin for her with his own hands. Every board, every nail. He carved a cradle, then a son. A little boy named Daniel. Cora and Daniel both died 2 winters back. Influenza, the doctor said. Inside of 3 weeks, one after the other." Addie pressed her hand flat to her chest. "And the cabin. He has not set foot inside it since the day they buried her. He kept the cradle in there. He kept her things in there. He has not opened that door in 2 years. Addie thought about that. She thought about a man who built a house for his wife, and then could not enter it after she was gone. She thought about Margaret's bonnet still hanging on the hook in her own room in Pittsburgh, because she could not bring herself to put it away. "He is offering me the place he built for her," Addie said. Quiet. "Yes," Mabel said. "Why?" Mabel set down her coffee cup. She looked at Addie for a long moment. "Because you stood on that platform yesterday with 2 babies in your arms and you did not cry. Not once. He saw it, the whole town saw it, and of all the people who saw it, he was the one who could not let it pass." Addie did not know what to do with that. She did not know what to do with most of what had been put in front of her in the last 18 hours, but she knew this: the cold was coming. The real cold, the kind that came down off the high passes in late November and did not lift again until April. And she had $11 and 2 infants and a stranger who had just offered her a roof. She stood up. "Mabel," she said, "will you watch the babies for an hour? I will watch them for as long as you need." Addie put on her coat. She walked through Eagle Rock, past the church, past the dry goods store, past the bank, past the saloon with the painted window. People watched her. She saw them. She did not slow down for any of it. She reached the freight dock at the back of the depot. 3 men were loading sacks of feed onto a long flatbed wagon. 2 black draft horses stood patient in the traces. The middle brother, she would learn in the next hour, was named Levi. He was 30. He moved like a man who had been still for so long that motion came as a small surprise. He was quieter than Jonah, which she would not have thought possible. The youngest, she would learn, was Asa. He was 27. He had a wide grin, and he was singing under his breath to one of the horses. He stopped singing when he saw her coming. He elbowed Jonah. Jonah turned. He saw her, and he did not move, and his face did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. Addie crossed the loading yard. She stopped 6 feet from him. "Mr. Calloway." "Ma'am." "I would like to accept your offer of the cabin." He nodded, slow, like a man who had been holding his breath for an hour without realizing it. "We leave at noon," he said. "Bring whatever you have. Mabel will have wrapped the babies warm. Levi and Asa will ride along in the wagon. You will ride in the wagon with me." "Yes," she said. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. She turned and walked back the way she came. Behind her, Asa let out a long, low whistle. "Well, brother," he said, "that is going to be one long winter." Jonah did not answer. He just turned back to the feed sacks and started lifting them again. The Calloway wagon pulled away from Green's boarding house at 12:30. The sky had cleared enough to show the white teeth of the Wind River Range to the north. The road climbed almost immediately. The town of Eagle Rock fell away behind them like a thing left on a riverbank. Asa rode point on a tall bay horse and sang half-remembered hymns to keep the babies from crying. He had a fine voice, surprising for a man his size. Addie watched him from the wagon bench and could not help a small smile. Levi rode behind the wagon on a gray mare. He watched the road behind them. He did not speak. She got the sense he was watching for something, or someone. Jonah drove. He sat to her left. He did not look at her. He did not need to. He kept his eyes on the team and the rising track and the trees that closed in around them as the road climbed. Addie sat with both babies wrapped tight in the basket between them. She had taken Mabel's quilt with her, and Mabel had pressed 3 more into her arms before she left, plus a tin of biscuits, plus a jar of honey, plus a small folded piece of paper with a Bible verse on it that Addie had not read yet. The road climbed and turned, climbed and turned. The pines closed in. The smell of them was sharp and clean and unlike anything Addie had ever known. She had grown up in cities, coal smoke and horse manure and brick. This was something else entirely. This was a smell like the world before people. After 3 hours, they crested a ridge. Below them lay a long, shallow valley with a creek running through the middle of it like a silver thread. On one side of the creek, a low ranch house sat between a barn and a stand of cottonwoods. Smoke rose from its chimney. 2 more buildings stood nearby, a workshop with a forge, and a small cabin set back among pines. The roof shake, gone gray with weather. A stovepipe rising from one corner. A single window facing the creek. Jonah stopped the wagon at the lip of the ridge. He looked at the cabin for a long moment. Addie did not say a word. Asa rode back to them. His face was unusually serious now. "Jonah," he said quietly, "want me to go down and open it up first?" Jonah did not answer for several seconds. Then he said, "No, I will do it." He clucked his tongue at the team. The wagon started moving again. They reached the bottom of the valley. They crossed a wooden plank bridge over the creek. The horses' hooves drummed hollow on the boards. Jonah pulled up in front of the cabin. He set the brake. He climbed down. Slow. He walked to the door of the cabin and he stood there with his hand on the latch and he didn't move. A full minute passed. Then Jonah opened the door. He did not go in. He stood in the doorway and he looked. Addie could see past his shoulder. She could see a single room, a bed against the far wall, a small wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, a washstand, a shelf with a few wooden bowls and an iron pot, and, in the corner, half lit by the cold light from the window, a cradle, hand-carved, the wood polished smooth from a young father's hands, a small folded blanket still inside it, 2 years untouched. Jonah stood there a long time. Asa swung off his horse, came up beside him, did not say anything, just stood there too. Levi tied his mare and came to stand on the other side of his brother. The 3 of them stood in the doorway of the empty cabin, like men at a graveside. Addie did not move from the wagon bench. She did not know what to do. This was not a place she should be entering. This was holy ground. After a long time, Jonah spoke. Asa, get a fire going in that stove. Levi, bring fresh water from the spring. I will. He paused. I will move the cradle into the main house. We will set it up in the corner of the kitchen by the window. The babies can have it. Cora would have wanted that. Asa looked at his brother. Jonah, he said, soft. It is the right thing, Jonah said. She would have said the same. He went inside. Addie watched him lift the cradle very carefully, as if he could still wake what was no longer inside it. He carried it across the yard to the main ranch house. He set it down on the porch. Then he walked back out toward the wagon. When he reached her, his face was set hard. His eyes were red around the edges, but they were dry. He did not look at her. Miss Whitfield, he said, the cabin is ready for you whenever you wish to step inside. She climbed down without help. She walked across the swept yard with one baby on each arm. She stopped at the doorway of the cabin. She looked inside. It was small. It was clean. It was full of light from the high window. It was the home a man had built with his own hands for a woman he had loved. She turned to Jonah. I will treat this place, she said, the way you would have wanted her to find it. Every day, as long as I am inside it. Jonah looked at her then, for the first time, properly, right into her eyes. She had thought his eyes were the color of amber. They were not. They were the color of whiskey held up to a fire, and they were full of more pain than she had ever seen on a single human face. He nodded once, slow. Thank you, he said. That night, the 4 of them shared a meal in the main ranch house. Asa had killed a young deer the day before, and Levi had butchered and salted it. There was venison stew and biscuits and dried apples cooked down with a little brown sugar. Asa kept the conversation moving. He told a story about an old mule named Buford, who had once dragged him a 1/4 mile through a field of thistle. He told a story about his attempt to learn the fiddle when he was 16, which had ended with their father throwing the fiddle off the porch. He coaxed the first real laugh out of Addie that she had given since the day Margaret died. Levi did not say much, but he held Ruth for almost an hour after dinner with a steadiness Addie had not expected. Ruth fell asleep on his chest with her small hand on the bone button of his shirt. Levi did not move, did not shift his weight, did not even shift his arm when his sleeve must have gone numb. He just sat there, looking at the little face, like he had never seen anything quite like it. Jonah sat at the head of the table and ate slowly and watched the fire. Once. Just once. Addie caught him looking at her across the table. He looked away the second she looked back, but she had seen it. Just for the half-second before he turned his eyes back to his plate. He had been looking at her the way a man looks at something he had stopped expecting to find. Late that night, she carried the babies back across the yard to the cabin. Asa walked her over with a lantern. He set the lantern on the table inside the door, made sure the stove was burning steady, told her the wood box was full to the brim, and good for 3 days. "Anything you need," he said. "You wave a lantern out the front window. One of us will come." "Thank you, Asa." He gave her a small grin, the grin of a man who knew his older brother better than his older brother knew himself. "Good night, Miss Addie." He left. Addie put the babies down in the bed and lay down beside them on top of the quilt. The cabin was warm. The wind pressed against the small window. Somewhere outside, an owl called once and went silent. She lay there in the warm and the quiet, and she thought. She thought about how 9 hours ago she had been on a train wondering if she would have a roof by nightfall. She thought about Margaret, about how Margaret had loved a man named Henry who had died in the dark 1,000 feet underground. About how Margaret had said, "Promise me they will have a mother." She thought about a man who had built a cabin for a wife and carved a cradle for a son and lost them both before the second snow. And she thought, "I am sleeping inside their first home. I am sleeping inside the dream they did not get to finish." She pulled the quilt up over the babies. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep right away, because she could hear something through the wall, very faint, from across the yard. It was Jonah Calloway, out on the porch of the main house, alone. She did not know how she knew it was him, but she did. She got up, quietly, went to the window, pulled the small linen curtain back the smallest fraction of an inch. She could see him. He stood at the edge of the porch with one hand on the post. The other hand held something, a folded piece of cloth. She could not see what it was. He was looking at the cabin, at her window. He was not crying, not exactly, but his shoulders were shaking the way a man's shoulders shake when he is fighting not to. She let the curtain fall. She went back to the bed. She lay down with the babies between her and the wall. She thought, "He just gave me his wife's house." And she thought, "He has been alone for a very long time." She did not sleep until almost morning. A week passed. The Calloway brothers learned her habits and she learned theirs. Asa was the first one up every morning. He started the fires in both buildings before sunrise, so the cabin and the main house would already be warm when anyone else stirred. He sang under his breath when he chopped wood. He had 100 bad jokes, and he tried every one of them on her at least twice. She liked him immediately. Levi was the steady one. He did not speak unless something was needed, but he noticed everything. He noticed that Addie reached for a pot with her left hand because her right wrist hurt from carrying the babies. By the third day, there was a kettle hook installed inside her cabin at exactly the height she could reach without lifting. He never said a word about it. Jonah was harder. He was kind. He was unfailingly polite. He brought firewood every morning and stacked it on her porch. He brought milk from the barn. He brought a bucket of clean water from the spring each evening. He did not enter her cabin. He did not knock. He just left things on the porch and walked back across the yard. He spoke to her at the supper table. He answered her questions. He listened when she spoke, but he did not let his eyes settle on her for more than half a second at a time. She understood. She thought she did. She was not Cora. She was a woman living in the house Cora had been meant to grow old in. And the cradle she had laid Ruth in tonight had been carved for a boy named Daniel, who was buried under a cottonwood tree at the edge of the meadow. It would take time. It would take a great deal of time. But Addie had time, because for the first time in a year she was not running from anything. On the 8th day, she rode down to town with Mabel. Mabel had come up to deliver a sack of fresh bread and a wheel of cheese and to see how things were going. They left the babies with Asa, who had volunteered with such enthusiasm that even Levi had laughed. In the general store, Addie was choosing a bolt of cotton flannel to make new shirts for the babies when she heard a voice she had hoped never to hear again. Cordelia Renshaw. She was at the front counter speaking to another woman. A friend, perhaps, or a victim. Hard to say. Honestly, Edith. Honestly. The man has not the sense God gave a sheep. I told him to burn those letters. Burn every single one. The minute any new bride writes about traveling with anyone at all, you put the letter in the stove. You do not file it. You do not keep it for reference. You burn it. He does what he is told most days. But this last one, this Whitfield woman. Cordelia's voice dropped slightly. Not enough. He must have missed the letters that came in August. I do not know how. The woman writes like a school teacher. Very neat hand. Very clear. There is no way he could have read them and not known. So either he did not read them, or he read them and decided to handle it on the platform in front of God and everyone. And what does that matter? Edith said. She is gone. She left town. She did not leave town. What do you mean she did not leave town? She is up on Iron Creek with the Calloway brothers. Edith made a small sound of scandal. Cordelia, no. Cordelia, yes. All three of them, apparently. A small, low laugh. Well, Edith said, that should solve our problem soon enough. The town will not stand for it. There is nothing this town hates worse than a fallen woman with 2 little ones living openly with 3 men. Why, we will not even need to do anything. The town will run her out for us by Christmas. Addie stood very still behind the bolts of cotton. Her hand had stopped on the flannel. She did not move. She did not breathe. Mabel was 3 aisles over. Mabel had not heard. Cordelia and Edith finished their conversation about ribbons. They paid for their parcels. They walked out the front door of the store, with the small bell jingling above them, like nothing in the world was wrong. Addie stood there for a long minute. Then she carefully took up her bolt of flannel, and her thread, and her needles. She walked to the counter. She paid in coins from Mabel's loan envelope. She thanked the clerk. She stepped out into the cold afternoon sun. She did not say a word to Mabel about it until they were on the road home. When she did, Mabel pulled the wagon to a stop. "They are not just going to gossip about you, child," Mabel said. "If she said the town will run you out, she has already started. She is not the kind of woman who says a thing she has not already put in motion. She will work through the church first, the respectable wives, then the merchants, then the schoolmistress, and the doctor. By the time it gets to the sheriff, she will have built it into a public matter." "What do I do?" Addie said. Mabel started the horses up again. She did not answer for a long time. When she did, she said only, "We tell Jonah, tonight, before we light the lamps. He needs to know what is coming." They reached Iron Creek Ridge at dusk. Jonah and Levi were unloading hay from a small cart by the barn. Asa was on the porch of the main house, with Samuel asleep against his chest, and Ruth gnawing happily on his thumb. Mabel did not even take her coat off. She told Jonah everything Addie had heard. Jonah listened without moving. When she was done, he set down the bale he had been holding. He looked at Addie for a long moment. Then he said, "Isa, saddle my horse." "Jonah," Levi said, "saddle it, Isa." "Where are you going?" Addie said. He turned to her. The amber in his eyes had gone hard. "To town," he said. to make sure Mr. Renshaw understands that the next person who speaks against you in public will be the last one to do it." He walked toward the barn. Levi looked at Mabel. Mabel looked at Addie. Addie did not move. But somewhere inside her chest, a small bright candle had just been lit. Because, for the first time in 3 months, since the day Margaret had taken her hand and made her promise, Addie was not alone. Not anymore. Outside, the wind began to lift. The first real snow of December came down the long valley in slow, heavy flakes. And on the porch of the cabin Jonah had built with his own hands, on the second step from the bottom, folded carefully under a piece of oiled brown paper to keep the wet off it, sat a heavy knit shawl, the color of summer sky. A small piece of paper was tucked into one of its folds. Just 2 words. Stay warm. The next morning, Addie found the shawl on the porch when she stepped out to fetch firewood. She picked it up, held it to her face. Did not cry. She had cried herself out the night before. But she stood there a long moment with the wool against her cheek, because no one had given her something to keep her warm, not since her mother, and she was 24 years old. Across the yard, the door of the main house opened. Jonah came out leading his bay gelding. The horse's breath made small clouds. He had not slept. She could see it in the way he held himself. He saw her see him. He paused in the middle of the yard. For a long moment they only looked at each other across the swept snow. She held the shawl up. A small question. He nodded once, the smallest possible movement of his chin. Then he turned, pulled himself into the saddle, rode out of the yard toward the trail down the mountain. She watched until the trees took him. He came back at sundown. Asa had warmed her supper on the stove, 3 times waiting. Levi had walked out twice to look down the trail. Addie sat with Ruth on her hip and Samuel in the cradle and tried not to count the hours. Jonah did not say much when he rode back into the yard. He put up the horse, came inside, sat down at the table. Asa set a plate in front of him. He looked at it for a long moment before he picked up the fork. "What did you do?" Asa said. Quiet. Jonah chewed, swallowed. "I stood in the doorway of Renshaw's shop for an hour and a half. I did not say a word. I just stood there with my hat in my hand, so everyone who came in to buy flour or thread or molasses had to walk around me." Levi looked up. Asa snorted soft. "Oh, brother." "By the time the noon train came in," Jonah said, "Cordelia Renshaw had come down from the big house in her best coat to ask me to leave. I told her I would leave when she stood out on the porch of her own store and apologized in front of the women she had been telling stories to." "And did she?" Addie said. She had not realized she had spoken until the words were out. Jonah looked at her. His eyes were tired in a way that went past one day. "No," he said, "but Garrett Hawthorne came out of the sheriff's office and stood next to me on the boardwalk. Did not say anything either, just stood, and I think she understood by mid-afternoon that this town is not going to be quite as easy for her as she thought." Levi set down his coffee cup. "Garrett knew you were going to do that. Garrett knew. You went to him first. I went to him first." Asa whistled. Brother, I have not seen you do anything that calculating since." Jonah cut him off with a look. "What I did," he said, "was small. It was the least I could do. It will buy us a week before she gets organized. I want to use that week." He looked at Addie again. They will come at you again. They have to. She cannot let you stay up here and live, 'cause every day you do is a day she fails." Addie did not answer. She did not need to. She just laid the shawl across her lap and smoothed it with her palm. The first real winter of Iron Creek closed in over them like a lid. The snow fell 3 days that first week and then settled in to stay. Drifts climbed up the north side of the barn until they touched the eaves. The creek where they drew water froze a hand thick by midweek, and Levi cut a clean hole each morning with an iron spike so they could drop a bucket. The pass to town would not be open again before March. Inside the ranch house and across the yard in the cabin, the 4 of them found a rhythm. Asa was the first up. Always. He stoked both stoves. He milked the cow and fed the chickens and put up the horse's grain ration. He sang as he worked. Bits of psalms, bits of old fiddle tunes, bits of nothing at all. Levi worked the barn and the workshop. He mended harness, he shod horses. He brought in firewood by the cord and split it into the rounds Addie needed for her stove. He carved. By the 3rd week he had made Ruth a small wooden horse and Samuel a small wooden bird. He set them on the table inside the cabin door without a word. Jonah worked everywhere. He hunted. He set traps. He doctored sick stock in the barn. He went out every 3rd day to check the line cabin at the far edge of their range. He came back covered in snow with elk hung over his saddle and his cheeks burned wind red. And in the evenings the 4 of them came together at the long pine table inside the main house, with the babies in the cradle by the window, with the lamps lit, with the snow ticking against the glass. Isa taught Addie how to load and fire a Colt revolver. He set up a length of board on a stump in the back pasture, and he set bottles on the board, and he made her hit each one 3 times before he would let her go inside for supper. "You are not bad," he said by the 3rd afternoon. "I am terrible," she said. "You are bad, but you are not bad. You will be good by spring. I would rather have a person who can hit 1 bottle than a person with a heart full of feelings." Levi taught her to read tracks. He took her out across the yard the day after a fresh snow and made her crouch beside the line of small, neat prints and tell him what had passed. Rabbit, then coyote, then coyote turning sharp. "What was the rabbit doing wrong?" Levi said. "Running. Running where?" "Toward those bushes." "Why?" "Because the coyote was already there." He almost smiled. Almost. "You are smarter than you think you are," he said. But Jonah was different. Jonah taught her medicine. It started by accident. Ruth caught a small chest cold in the 2nd week of December. Addie was rocking her late at night in the kitchen of the main house when Jonah came in with an armload of wood for the stove. He set the wood down. He paused, looked at the baby. "How long has she been wheezing like that?" "Since this evening." He went out without a word. Came back 10 minutes later with a clay jar of dark amber syrup and a small linen bag of dried leaves. "Boil 2 cups of water with this leaf. Then strain it and stir in 1 spoon of this. She drinks 1 swallow every 2 hours until the wheeze breaks. By morning, she will be better." "What is it?" "Mullein, hyssop, honey from August." "Did you make this?" He hesitated. "Cora did, 2 summers ago. She kept jars of it in the root cellar. They keep 3 years if you store them dark." He had not meant to say her name. She saw him not mean to. "Jonah," she said, soft. "If it is hard." "It is not hard," he said. "Too quick. She would have wanted it used. She made it to be used." He turned to go. At the doorway he stopped, turned back. "My wife was a doctor's daughter," he said. "She read every book in her father's medical library before she was 18. I learned from her. I am not a doctor, but what I know I can pass to you if you want it. I want it. Then come up to the kitchen tomorrow after the boys eat breakfast. We will start with what grows here." He left. Addie sat in the lamplight with the baby and the clay jar, and she understood, without him saying so. He was offering her not just knowledge. He was offering her the part of his wife he still had to give. By the end of the 3rd week, she had begun to know the inside of a small drawer he kept in the kitchen. The drawer was where he kept Cora's notes. Pressed leaves between layers of paper, with her handwriting on each one. Yarrow for bleeding, comfrey for bones, willow for fever, echinacea for the deep cough that came in February. Sometimes when Addie read the writing, she felt as if Cora Calloway was sitting beside her at the table, showing her what to do, approving. It did not feel like trespass. It felt like inheritance. It happened on the 17th of December. Jonah had gone up to the line cabin that morning. Isa and Levi were down by the creek, cutting a fresh hole through the new ice. Addie was inside the cabin with the babies. She heard the crash from the eaves above her head and ran outside before her boots were fastened. Jonah was on the ground. The ladder he had leaned against the cabin to clear snow off the chimney was in 2 pieces beside him. He had landed on his right side. He was not making any noise at all. "Asa!" she shouted. "Levi!" She knelt down beside him. "Mr. Calloway, look at me." "I am looking at you," he said, through his teeth. "I am also not getting up because if I do, my wrist is going to make me embarrass myself." She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "Where else does it hurt? My wrist, my ribs, my pride. Show me your wrist." He held it out. It was swelling already. The skin was beginning to mark. "Broken or sprained," she said. "Sprained, I think. Maybe a small chip. I have done it before. I know what it feels like." She heard Asa and Levi coming up from the creek behind her. She gave Levi quick instructions. Levi went straight to the cabin and brought back the linen bag of comfrey leaves and a clean tin pot. She did not let Jonah stand until she had splinted the wrist with a piece of oak slat Asa cut to size. She did not let him take a step until Levi had helped her cut his shirt away from the side that had landed, and she had checked the ribs with the flat of her hand, the way Cora's notes had said. "They are bruised, not broken. You will breathe shallow for a week. You will not lift anything with that arm for at least 3. I have work to do. You have brothers." Addie. She did not look up from wrapping the comfrey poultice. "Mr. Calloway, if you tell me what you have to do that you cannot ask Levi or Asa to handle for 3 weeks, I am willing to listen. Otherwise, sit down, on the porch, inside, out of the wind, and drink the tea I am about to make you." She heard Asa muffle a laugh behind her. She heard Levi let out his small, almost smile. She did not see Jonah's face, but she felt it the moment he gave in. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Quiet. She took him inside the cabin. She had not had him inside the cabin since the day they arrived. She closed the door against the wind. She sat him at her small table. She set a kettle on her stove. She moved around the small space, with both babies asleep in a basket near the bed. She made willow tea. She made him drink it. She put a folded blanket behind his lower back when he winced and tried to hide it. She sat down across from him. You have done this before. Twice. Once when I was 19 and a young horse rolled on me. Once 2 years ago. 2 years ago when? He looked at the table. The week of Cora's funeral. She set down the spoon she had been turning in her hands. What happened that week? I do not really remember it. People came up to the ranch. They brought food. The pastor talked. Asa cried. Levi did not. I went out at one point to bring in firewood, and I slipped on the porch and broke the same wrist. He looked up at her. His eyes were red around the edges. I think I wanted to break it. I do not know if that makes sense. It makes sense. She did not say it does not. She did not say it should not. She did not say anything except that. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, Cora had hands like yours. Then he looked back down at the table. She did not move. She did not breathe. Because something had just shifted, and she did not want to be the one who shifted it back. After a moment, he said, I should go check on the boys. They will be worrying. They are worrying. Then I should go. Yes, you should. He stood up. Slow. He paused at the doorway. Thank you, Miss Whitfield. Addie, please. After tonight, you can call me Addie. He looked back at her over his shoulder. He did not say her name, not yet, but he nodded, and he stepped out into the cold and closed her door behind him. The fever came down the mountain in the second week of January. Levi was the one who saw the smoke first. A thin pillar rising from the saddle of land 4 miles east where the Pinedale Logging Company ran a crew of 12 men through the winter. The smoke was not chimney smoke. It was too steady, too low, too gray. Asa saddled up and went out. He was back inside 2 hours with his horse blowing hard. They are burning everything, he said. Bedding, clothes. They have lost 2 already. They are losing more. The foreman says it came on 3 nights ago, and they did not know what they were looking at. Jonah was up and putting on his coat before Asa was done speaking. Sledge runners on the wagon. Heavy quilts. The 2 crates from the cellar. I am coming, Addie said. Jonah turned. Addie, I am coming. I know more about fever now than half the doctors in this territory. You taught me. And you are not going up there with 1 good arm and no help. The babies. Mabel is up here this week. You sent for her 2 days ago because of the storm. She can stay until we are back. Asa and Levi can run the chores. The babies will be safe. Jonah looked at her. He looked at Mabel coming through the door of the main house with a wet shawl across her shoulders. He looked at Levi, who had nodded once. All right, he said. We go in 20 minutes. It was scarlet fever. She knew it from the second she saw the first man. Bright red rash across his trunk. A tongue gone strawberry red. The high, punishing fever that did not break until it broke for good. There were 8 sick men by the time they arrived. There would be 10 by morning. Addie and Jonah worked through the night without stopping. They worked through the next day. They worked through the night after. She bathed fevers with cold water. She pulled from a stock pond. She fed broth 1 spoon at a time into men who had not eaten in 3 days. She held the hand of a logger from Minnesota named Olaf while he died. He had a wife and a baby in Cheyenne. He gave her his Bible to send to them. She put it inside her coat next to her own heart, and she did not tell Jonah she was crying because Jonah did not need anything else heavy to carry. Jonah set bones that had broken when fever delirium had thrown men out of bunks. He stitched a foreman's hand back together by lamplight while the man bit a leather belt. He brewed willow bark tea in batches and made every man who could swallow drink a full cup every 2 hours. On the 4th night the fever broke for the 6 men who would live. On the 5th morning the foreman walked them to their wagon with his hat in his hand. "I will not forget this," he said. "Not me, not the company, not any man in this camp who lived because of you." Jonah nodded. Addie tried to say something and could not. They drove home in silence. She slept against his shoulder for the last hour of the drive. He did not move his arm. He did not breathe deeper than he had to. He let her sleep. When they pulled into the yard at Iron Creek Ridge, the cabin had a lantern lit in the window, and Asa was running across the snow from the barn, with Mabel close behind him. "Jonah." "What?" "It is Ruth." The world went very still inside Addie's chest. "Show me." The baby was burning. Her small body was hot through to the bone. Her cheeks were the color of fire. The first beginnings of the rash were starting to show across her ribs. Addie went down on her knees by the cradle, and she put her hand on the small forehead, and she felt the heat go up through her palm, and into her wrist and into her chest like something poured. "How long?" she said. "Since yesterday afternoon," Mabel said. "I thought it was only teething, then in the night. Samuel, cool as a creek. He has not even fussed." "All right." Addie's hands had begun to shake. She made them stop. "All right. Cool cloths. Now, boil water. I need every clean piece of linen in this house. Asa ride for Garrett Hawthorne and ask him to send word to the next 2 ranches that the fever is on this mountain. Levi bring up the last 2 jars of willow bark and the honey from the cellar." Jonah did not move. He stood in the doorway of the main house, pale, the color of new ash, his good hand on the doorframe. "Jonah." He did not answer. "Jonah." He turned and looked at her. "Listen to me. Listen. This is not Cora. This is not Daniel. This is Ruth. She is 7 months old, and she is strong, and we are not 3 days late on this. We caught it on the first day. We are going to fight it. You are going to help me. Are you with me?" He did not speak. His mouth moved once, closed, opened again. "I am with you. Then move." He moved. For 4 days and 4 nights they did not sleep. They took turns at the cradle. Mabel held Samuel in the next room and prayed without stopping. Asa rode 3 times to the next ranch and back to check that no one else was sick. Levi stayed by the stove and kept the kettle boiling and the linen clean and brought willow bark tea by the cup whenever Addie asked for it. She bathed Ruth's small body every 20 minutes. She lifted the baby into shallow pans of tepid water. She wrung out cool cloths and laid them across the small chest. She tilted teaspoons of cool willow tea between the small lips. She did not let the fever climb past 104. She would not let it. Jonah sat across the cradle from her, with his bad arm braced on his knee and his good hand on Ruth's foot. He did not speak for hours at a stretch. He just kept his hand on the small foot, like he could hold the baby in this world by touch. On the second night, Ruth stopped responding. Her small eyes had been open and tracking earlier. Now, they were closed, and she did not flinch when Addie pressed the cool cloth to her face. Addie's chest cracked. She turned to Jonah. She did not have to ask anything. He reached across the cradle. He took her hand. His grip was strong, even with the bad arm. He looked at her with eyes that had not slept in nearly a week. "Do not let her go," he said. He was telling her he could not do this again. He had buried a wife and a son in the same week, and the cottonwood tree at the edge of the meadow held both their stones, and he could not. He simply could not. Addie squeezed his hand back, hard. "I am not letting her go," she said. She bathed the baby again. She turned her on her side. She moistened the small, chapped lips. She sang a hymn her mother had taught her when she was 4. She sang it twice. On the 3rd night, the fever spiked to 105. On the 4th night, it broke. Addie was the first to feel it. The skin under her palm changed from dry, hot iron to damp, cool damp, like a fever sweat, a clean fever sweat. She pressed her cheek to the baby's forehead. She sobbed once, out loud. She couldn't stop it. "Jonah!" He was beside her before she finished saying his name. "She is sweating. She is sweating, Jonah." He put his good hand to the baby's forehead. His shoulders broke down. He sank to his knees beside the cradle, and he laid his forehead against the wooden side, and he wept, silently, the way men of his kind weep when they have held it inside for 2.5 years. Addie reached across the small space, and she put her hand on the back of his head. He let her. He did not move. He did not move for a long, long time. When he finally lifted his face, he could not look at her. He stood. He walked out of the room, past Mabel, who was holding Samuel and crying, past Levi, who was standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand, out through the kitchen, out the back door. She found him, an hour later, on the back porch. He was sitting on the top step with his head in his hands. She sat down next to him. She did not touch him. Not yet. The snow had stopped. The sky over the Wind River Range had cleared into a hard, cold black with too many stars. After a long time, he spoke. He did not look at her. "I have to tell you something, and after I tell you, I will understand if you want to take the babies and go to Mabel's. I will understand if you do not want to be inside the same wall as me. I will not blame you." "All right." He took a breath. "Cora did not die of influenza." She was very still. "What did she die of?" "She was murdered." He took another breath. The cold air made it hitch. 2.5 years ago, Cora began to look into something that did not sit right with her. A young woman had come off the train one June afternoon, expecting to marry Silas Renshaw. Mary Sue Holloway. She was 20 years old. She had come from a small town in Ohio. She did not have anyone. She brought a small chest of her grandmother's china and $40 in her pocket. He stopped. She waited. She and Cora became friends. Cora was the only woman in town who treated her like a person. The Renshaws would not see her. They told everyone Mary Sue had misrepresented herself. They told everyone she had lied about her age, about her past, about whether she had been married before. They had not. They had not. Mary Sue had not. Cora believed her. Cora started asking. She found out that 2 other young women had come and gone through Eagle Rock in the 18 months before Mary Sue. She wrote letters to the priest in Ohio, to a clerk in St. Louis, to a man who had been on the same train as Mary Sue. And she learned what Mabel told you in her kitchen the day you arrived. The same pattern, the same scheme. 5 young women now. 5 women who came carrying everything they had. 5 women whose passage money and savings ended up in the back room of Renshaw's general store. What was Cora going to do? She was going to write to a federal marshal in Cheyenne. She had drafts of the letter on her writing table. She had not sent them yet. She wanted to be sure first. She did not want to risk her name on something she could not prove. And then Mary Sue's boarding house caught fire. He stopped again. He had to. After the fire, Cora began to be sick. A fever. We thought it was grief. She had taken Mary Sue's death very hard. The doctor said it was influenza. She would not eat. She drank water from a particular pitcher because she said cold water was the only thing that did not make her ill. The pitcher had been a gift, sent up to her the week after the funeral, from the women of the Eagle Rock Church Relief Society, a condolence. Jonah, I did not see it. I did not see it. I drank from that same pitcher one time and it tasted bitter. And I did not think anything of it. Jonah, you could not have. Daniel drank from it twice. The words came out as if they were broken pieces. Addie put her hand on his back. He did not turn toward her. My wife was poisoned in my own kitchen by a gift I let into my house. My son died because she was nursing him at the time, and he drank what she could no longer keep down. I have known what killed them for 1 year and 7 months. I learned it from a saddle peddler who was passing through with stories from the St. Louis newspapers. The same week, a railway man's daughter had been linked to 2 arsenic poisonings in Missouri before she married a merchant in Wyoming. Addie understood now why he could not enter the cabin he had built for his wife. She understood why he had not been able to walk past Silas Renshaw on a train platform without his hands going white. She understood why he had taken her in. You could not say anything because you cannot prove it, she said. I cannot prove it. I have no witnesses. I have no picture. I burned it the day after I learned what was in it because I could not have it in the same room as the boys. The doctor's certificate says influenza. There is nothing to take to a court. There is now, Addie said. He looked at her then. There is now, because I am here. Because I am a witness to what she has been doing. Because if she has done it once, she has done it more than once, and I am willing to stand up and say so, in a courtroom, in front of any man who asks me. He shook his head. Addie, she has tried to kill me twice. She has succeeded once. If she knew you were willing to testify, she would not stop until... Until what? Until she stopped you. Then we do not give her the chance. He looked at her for a long moment. He had not held her hand since the cradle. He took it now. He took it, and he laid it flat against his chest, above his heart, over his shirt and his coat and the layered wool of his vest. I cannot lose anyone else, he said. Quiet, so quiet she barely heard it. You will not. The next visitor up the mountain was Sheriff Garrett Hawthorne. He came on the 23rd of January with snow piled to his stirrups. He came alone. He came carrying a folded telegraph. He sat down at the kitchen table in the main house and he refused coffee, and he laid the telegraph on the table, and he slid it across to Jonah. Jonah read it. He read it twice. He passed it without a word to Addie. Pittsburgh Police Department. Warrant for the arrest of Miss Adeline Whitfield. Charge theft of $250. Sworn complaint from Mr. Silas Renshaw of Eagle Rock, Wyoming. Corroborating affidavit from Mr. Bartholomew Whitfield of Pittsburgh. Extradition to be effected within 14 days of receipt. Addie set the paper on the table. She felt very cold. Not the kind of cold the weather did to a person. Another kind. Garrett, Jonah said. I have not served it, Garrett said. I see that. I have until the 7th of February. After that, I have to ride up here with 2 deputies, and I have to take her into custody, and I have to put her on a train east. The babies go to the county home in Cheyenne until a relative claims them. The relative is the same uncle who signed this affidavit. Garrett. Jonah, you know me. I am not Silas Renshaw's man. I am not Cordelia Renshaw's man either. I am the county's man. And what is on that paper is what I have to do unless something changes. What could change it? Garrett looked at Addie. A husband, he said. A husband takes on his wife's debts. A husband cannot be compelled to testify against his wife. A husband can post bond. A husband can demand the matter be tried in his county of residence, which is right here in this territory, not in Pennsylvania. A husband changes everything on that paper. He stood up. He picked up his hat. He paused at the kitchen door. You have 2 weeks, he said. If by the time I come back up this mountain on the 7th, she is not Mrs. Calloway, I'm going to have to do my job. He went out. The door closed. Asa and Levi looked at Jonah. Jonah looked at Addie. Addie looked at the babies in the cradle by the window. She did not speak. She did not know how. After a long minute, Jonah pushed his chair back from the table. He stood up. He walked around the table. He did not look at his brothers. He stopped in front of Addie. She raised her face to him. He went down on one knee, not the way men did it in stories. He did it the way a man does who has not thought about how he is supposed to do it. He just went down because his legs would not hold him standing for this. He put one hand flat on the seat of the chair next to her. He laid the other hand, the bad one, the one still wrapped in a comfrey poultice and a strip of linen. He laid it on her knee. Adeline Whitfield. Jonah, I am going to ask you to marry me, and I want you to listen to what I am asking you before you answer. All right. I am not asking you to love me. Not yet. I do not know if I am ready to ask anyone to love me. I do not know if my heart is whole enough for it. I am asking you to let me put my name in front of yours so that no one in this country can take you or those children away from this kitchen. That is the first thing I am asking. She did not move. The second thing I am asking is for time to try to learn whether 2 people who came to this house broken can build something out of what we have. I would like to try. I would like to wake up tomorrow and try. I would like to wake up the day after that and try. And every day, for as long as you would let me. He stopped. He looked up at her. His eyes were red. He was not embarrassed about it. I am not Silas Renshaw, Addie. I am not your uncle. I will not lie to you. I will not break your things. I will not bargain for what I cannot give you. I am asking you a real question, and I will not be hurt by your answer if your answer is no. The kitchen was so quiet she could hear the snow on the window. Mabel was crying silently in the corner. Asa had turned away to the stove. Levi was looking at the floor. She looked at Jonah for a long moment. Then she put her hand over the hand he had laid on her knee. She said, "Yes." He closed his eyes. He did not move for several seconds. Then he opened his eyes and he stood up. And he did the only thing he knew how to do. He pulled her up out of the chair. He took her into his arms. He put his face into her hair. And he held her as if he had been waiting for someone to let him do that for a very, very long time. He did not kiss her. Not that night. He did not have to. They were married on the 2nd of February at the Little White Church on the south end of Eagle Rock. The church belonged to a Methodist circuit minister named Reverend Caldwell, who came through every 2 weeks if the weather allowed it. The weather had not allowed it for a month. He had ridden in the day before on a borrowed mule because Mabel had sent word to him through a freighter who had owed her a favor. The church was not full. It did not need to be. Mabel sat in the front pew with Samuel asleep on her shoulder, and Ruth wide-eyed and watching everything. Garrett Hawthorne stood up with Jonah as his witness because Jonah had asked him to. Levi stood beside Garrett. Asa stood at the church door, because Asa had decided that the door was the most important position to defend that morning, and no one had been willing to argue with him. A few of the women from the town's relief society had come. The respectable ones. The ones who had not yet decided whose side they were on. A blacksmith, the schoolmistress, the owner of the Feed and Seed. Reverend Caldwell read from 1 Corinthians 13. Charity suffereth long and is kind. He read it with the cadence of a man who had performed many weddings on the Western Circuit. The cadence of a man who had also performed too many funerals. He read it as though the words mattered. Addie wore a dress of dark green wool that Mabel had pulled out of her own trunk that morning and altered to fit her with a quick hem before breakfast. Her hair was pinned up in a soft, loose knot at the nape of her neck. She had small white winter berries pinned at her shoulder, where another woman might have worn a brooch. Jonah wore a black wool suit, the same suit he had been married in the first time. Asa had cleaned and brushed it without anyone telling him to. Jonah's wrist was no longer wrapped. He had not let it be wrapped on this day. He held both his hands open in front of him during the vows. The right one trembled. He did not try to hide it. When Reverend Caldwell asked the question, both of them said the words clearly. Asa wept openly. Asa was not embarrassed about it. Levi did not weep, but he stood with his hand flat over his heart through the whole ceremony when the Reverend pronounced them. Jonah turned to Addie. He looked at her for a long moment as though he was committing the moment to memory. Then he leaned down and he kissed her. Once, softly, on the mouth. It tasted of cold air and coffee. He pulled back. He smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile in 8 weeks. It changed his face entirely. Behind them at the back of the church, Asa whistled and Mabel sobbed, and the schoolmistress clapped her gloved hands twice and stopped because she was not sure if you were supposed to clap. Outside the church, the snow had stopped. A pale February sun was trying to come out over the Wind River Range. They came out the front of the church, and Reverend Caldwell shook Jonah's hand and shook Addie's hand, and said a small, kind blessing. And as they walked down the church steps with Mabel carrying Samuel and Asa carrying Ruth and Levi, leading both their horses and the loaded sleigh that would take them home up the mountain. A stage from the east pulled up at the depot, 100 yards down the street. A man stepped down from the stage. He was 60 years old. He was thin. He wore a long, expensive black coat and a beaver fur hat. 2 younger men in lawyers' suits stepped down behind him. He looked across the street. He saw the wedding party on the church steps. He saw Adeline Calloway, an hour married, with one of her sister's babies in her hand and one in her arm. He did not nod. He did not wave. He did not call out. He simply stood very still on the boardwalk in front of the depot, and he smiled the way a snake smiles when it sees the place where the field mouse is going to come out. Addie froze on the church steps. Jonah felt her go still. He followed her eyes. "Who is that?" he said. "Quiet." "My uncle," she said. "That is my Uncle Bartholomew Whitfield." He had come for the babies. He had come for the insurance money Margaret and Henry had left them. And he had come, Addie understood at once, by direct invitation, because the two lawyers in dark coats behind him were already crossing the street to the big white house at the top of Pine Street, where Cordelia Renshaw was waiting at her open front door. The hearing was set for the 11th of February. A circuit judge named Theodore Holden was already on his way from Cheyenne. He had heard a similar arsenic case 2 years before, and he was not the kind of man you could buy. But he was also not the kind of man who took kindly to a woman with a federal extradition warrant and a corroborating affidavit from a blood relative. The warrant alone gave Bartholomew Whitfield grounds to petition for guardianship of the babies on the same morning the theft case was heard. If he won that petition, Addie would lose Ruth and Samuel before the noon train left. The night before the hearing, Addie sat at the kitchen table in the main house writing a letter. The babies were asleep in the cradle. Mabel had gone home with the promise to be back in the morning. Asa and Levi had ridden to town to meet with Garrett and to spend the night at the boarding house so they could be at the courthouse first thing. Jonah was outside checking the team for the morning drive. Addie wrote in careful blue and blue ink, "Dear Margaret, I am writing this so that if anything goes wrong tomorrow, you will know I did everything I could. I promised you they would have a mother. I promised. And if a judge in Eagle Rock takes that promise from me tomorrow morning, I want you to know I did not give it. Not freely, not in a way that ever counted." She paused. She wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "Tonight I am married. He is a good man. He is older than I was looking for, and quieter than I knew a man could be, and he carries more in him than is fair for one person to carry. But he carried me into a warm cabin in the middle of a blizzard, and he held Ruth's foot for 3 nights while she fought a fever. And he asked me a question on his knees and listened for my answer. If they take the babies tomorrow, I will go where they are taken. I want you to know that. If they do not, I will love your children for you, every day, until they are old. I miss you." She set the pen down. The door opened behind her. Jonah came in stamping snow from his boots. He stopped when he saw her. He saw the letter. He saw her face. He didn't ask. He came around the table and he sat down across from her. He took both her hands in his. "Tomorrow," he said, "whatever happens, you and the babies leave that courthouse with me. One way or another. What if? Whatever happens, Addie." She nodded. He stood. He walked around the table. He kissed the top of her head once. He went up the small staircase to the bedroom where he had moved his things 3 days ago, because she had asked him to. She finished her letter. She folded it. She put it inside the cover of her Bible. She blew out the lamp. She did not see them, but out by the tree line at the south edge of the pasture, 3 men sat their horses very quietly in the dark. They were the men Cordelia Renshaw had hired through her cousin in Denver 3 days earlier. They had been told to take what they could from Iron Creek Ridge during the hours the family would be in court. The 2 babies, alive, the wife, by any means available, the husband, if he came in their way. They had been told to ride hard for the train that left Cheyenne south at dawn the next morning. They watched the lamps in the windows of the main house go out one by one. They settled in to wait for first light. The wind came up out of the southwest at 3 in the morning. Jonah had not slept. He sat in the dark of the bedroom upstairs with his back against the wall and his good hand on the Winchester laid across his knees. Addie slept beside him with her hand on his thigh and the babies in the cradle at the foot of the bed. He had moved the cradle from the kitchen to the bedroom the day before. Because of the kitchen window. The kitchen window faced the south pasture and the tree line. Jonah had not told Addie why he was moving the cradle. He had not told her about the way the dogs had not slept the last 2 nights. He had not told her about the trail Levi found yesterday morning when he was riding back from the line cabin. 3 horses, shod for hard ground, heading west out of a ravine 3 miles north of the ranch road. He had told Asa. Asa had whistled 3 times when he left for town with Levi. 3 short whistles. Their boyhood signal for, "I do not like it." Outside, the wind sang in the eaves. At 3:47 by the small clock on the dresser, Jonah heard the back porch step creak under a weight that was not his own. He did not move. He waited. He waited until the second step creaked. Then the third. Then he leaned over, and he put his mouth right next to Addie's ear, and he said one word. Addie. She came awake all at once, the way a mother of 2 infants comes awake, from sleep to full alarm in a single breath. She did not speak. She did not move her hands. She only looked at him. He pointed to the floor beside the bed. She slid out from under the quilt without making the bed creak. She lowered herself down beside the cradle. Both babies were asleep. She put one hand flat on Ruth's belly and one hand flat on Samuel's belly. She stayed there, crouched. Jonah picked up the Winchester. He moved to the bedroom door without his boots. The floorboards he had laid himself 2 years ago did not give a sound. He had cut them long and laid them green. He had known a day might come when he needed silence in his own house. He opened the door 3 inches. Below him on the staircase, a man was already on the 3rd step. The man was carrying a long knife. Jonah did not say go back. He did not say drop it. He did not say a single word. He raised the Winchester, and he fired. The man fell backward off the staircase and crashed into the front door, and did not move. 2 more shots came from the kitchen, aimed at the sound of his rifle. They punched through the bedroom wall a foot above his head and lodged in the rafters. He dropped flat to the hallway floor. He heard the kitchen door bang open. A second man running, a third voice from outside. "Get the woman!" the voice shouted. "Get the babies! Burn the rest!" Addie heard it. He heard her hear it. She moved like he had not seen a woman move before. She did not lift the babies. She rolled the cradle. She rolled the entire cradle on its rockers across the rug and behind the heavy oak bedstead. She pinned it there with her own body. She reached up under her pillow with one hand, without taking her eyes off the door. The Colt revolver Asa had taught her to use came out steady. She held it with both hands the way Asa had shown her. She did not look like a frightened bride. She looked like a mother of 2 children, waiting for the next man. Through her door. The next man came through her door. She put 2 rounds into him before he was all the way into the room. The first one hit his shoulder. The second one hit the door frame. The third hit dead center. He went down. There was a half-second of silence. Then the third voice from outside shouted something that was lost in the wind, and a horse let out a sharp neigh of pain, and there was a clatter of hooves moving fast. Then a single rifle shot. Far, from down by the bridge, then another, closer, then a man's voice, loud, clear, carrying. "Jonah Calloway, hold your fire! It is Owen Pike! I have 10 men with me!" Jonah closed his eyes for one full breath. Then he stood up. He walked into the bedroom. Addie was still crouched behind the bed with the Colt aimed at the door. Her hands were not even shaking yet. That would come later. "It is over," he said. "Lower the gun, Addie. Lower it." She lowered it. Then she dropped it on the rug and she crawled to him and she put both arms around his neck and she held on so hard he thought she might leave bruises. "I have you," he said into her hair. "I have you. I have you." The hearing in Eagle Rock Territorial Court opened at 9 in the morning on the 11th of February. It opened 3 hours later than scheduled because Judge Theodore Holden had refused to begin until he had personally walked through Iron Creek Ridge Ranch with Sheriff Garrett Hawthorne and Captain Owen Pike. He had stood in the bedroom upstairs, and he had looked at the dead man on the staircase and the dead man on the bedroom floor, and he had asked Captain Pike one question: "Who hired them?" Captain Pike had answered quietly, "That is what your hearing is going to find out, Your Honor." By the time Judge Holden walked into the courtroom on Main Street, he was already wearing a different face than the one he had stepped off the train with. Addie sat at the defendant's table in a fresh, dark gray dress Mabel had pressed for her at 4 in the morning. Jonah sat beside her in a clean shirt with a fresh strip of linen wrapped around the small flesh wound a bullet had taken out of his left forearm. The baby slept in a covered basket between them, under Mabel's hand. Levi and Asa sat directly behind. Asa kept reaching forward to touch Addie's shoulder, just lightly, just to make sure she was there. At the prosecution table, Silas Renshaw and Bartholomew Whitfield sat with 2 attorneys from Cheyenne, whose suits cost more than Asa's horse. Cordelia Renshaw sat behind them in a black wool coat with a fur collar and a small black hat with a veil. She did not look at Addie. She did not look at anyone. The lead attorney for the prosecution was a man named Mr. Vickers. He stood when the court was called to order. "Your Honor, we come before the court today on a matter of theft. $250. Stolen by the defendant Adeline Calloway, formerly Whitfield, from the establishment of my client, Mr. Silas Renshaw, 8 months ago." "Mr. Vickers," the judge said, "how does your client claim to have lost $250 to a defendant who has not, by his own previous public statements, ever set foot inside his store?" Mr. Vickers paused. "Your Honor, how?" "The funds in question were sent by post to the defendant as traveling money to facilitate her arrival in Eagle Rock for the purpose of marriage." "And were they sent?" "They were." "Show me the receipt." Mr. Vickers looked at Silas. Silas looked at Cordelia. Cordelia did not look up. "Your Honor, we will produce a sworn affidavit." "From whom?" "From Mr. Renshaw and the postmaster. We are working to locate." "That answer is unsatisfactory, Mr. Vickers." The judge made a note in a small leather book. Mr. Vickers tried again. He brought Bartholomew Whitfield to the stand. Bartholomew Whitfield was sworn in. He spoke smoothly. He had been practicing in his head for 2 weeks. He told the court he had personally counted out $250 from his own funds at his sister-in-law's request before she died. He told the court Mr. Renshaw had wired the money to Pittsburgh to be passed to the defendant for travel. He told the court the defendant had stolen the entire sum and had also taken his sister-in-law's wedding silver from his house. He spoke for 15 minutes. When he sat down, the prosecution rested. Then Jonah's attorney stood up. Jonah's attorney was not a man from Cheyenne in a fine suit. Jonah's attorney was a woman. Her name was Miss Hattie Ferguson. She had grown up 2 streets over from Mabel Green in Eagle Rock, and she had read law for 6 years under an old judge who had finally died, and left her his books. She had been admitted to the territorial bar 3 months ago. She was the 7th woman ever to be admitted to the bar in Wyoming Territory. She did not own a fine suit either. She wore a dark blue dress and a small, severe brooch at her throat, and she walked to the front of the courtroom carrying a thick brown folder. She set the folder on the prosecution's table without asking. She turned to face Judge Holden. "Your Honor, the defense is prepared to enter into evidence the following items." She opened the folder. Item 1. 47 personal letters between Miss Adeline Whitfield and Mr. Silas Renshaw, written between February and October of last year. All postmarked, all preserved, all in the original envelopes. Silas Renshaw went a shade lighter. Item 2. 5 of those letters from the defendant to Mr. Renshaw clearly and explicitly state that the defendant would be traveling with 2 infant nieces and a nephew. Item 3. 3 replies from Mr. Renshaw, in which he confirms, quote, that children are a blessing in a young country and shall be welcomed as such, end quote. Item 4. The bank record of the Pittsburgh Mercantile Trust, dated July 12th of last year, showing the defendant's withdrawal of $267 from a savings account in the name of her late sister, Margaret Whitfield Henderson, of which $244 were used to purchase 3 rail tickets and various baby supplies, the remainder being in the defendant's possession when she stepped onto the train. Mr. Vickers tried to object. Judge Holden held up one finger. Mr. Vickers sat back down. Item 5. A signed affidavit from the postmaster of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, confirming that no postal money order from Mr. Silas Renshaw or any other party in Wyoming Territory has ever been received in the name of Adeline Whitfield. Not at her residence, not at her uncle's residence, not ever. The courtroom was very still. Bartholomew Whitfield's face had gone slowly white, then slowly red. He started to stand. His attorney pulled him back down. Item 6. 3 affidavits from 3 different women presently residing in 3 different states. Each woman states that she was contacted by Mr. Silas Renshaw of Eagle Rock, Wyoming, for the purpose of marriage. Each woman traveled to Eagle Rock. Each woman was publicly rejected upon arrival. Each woman lost her passage money and savings to Mr. Renshaw. None of these women have been reimbursed. 2 have asked to be present today and are sitting in the back of this courtroom, prepared to testify under oath. 2 women in the back row stood up. The whole courtroom turned. The first woman was about 30. She was wearing a brown traveling dress. She held a folded handkerchief in her lap. The second woman was perhaps 25. She had come on the morning train from Cheyenne with her brother. They sat back down. The whole courtroom turned back to Miss Ferguson. Item 7, Your Honor. A signed statement from Sheriff Garrett Hawthorne detailing the deaths or disappearances of 5 women in Eagle Rock between 1877 and 1879. All 5 women had come to Eagle Rock to marry Mr. Silas Renshaw. All 5 women's belongings were last accounted for in the storage room behind Mr. Renshaw's store. Item 8. The personal, medical, and investigative notebook of Mrs. Cora Calloway, including pressed evidence and 3 drafts of an unsent letter to a federal marshal in Cheyenne, detailing what Mrs. Calloway believed at the time of her death to be a fraud and homicide operation conducted by Mrs. Cordelia Renshaw. Cordelia Renshaw lifted her veil for the first time. Her eyes were the color of cold metal. Miss Ferguson did not look at her. Item 9, Your Honor. A signed statement from the saddle peddler, Mr. Eustace Brown of St. Louis, detailing his own investigation conducted on behalf of the St. Louis Police Department into 2 arsenic poisonings in the state of Missouri in 1873. Investigations which led to the indictment of one Cordelia Brewster, who fled the state of Missouri 3 days before her arrest, and who, according to public marriage records, was married 6 weeks later in Eagle Rock, Wyoming, to one Mr. Silas Renshaw. Cordelia's hand went to her veil. Her hand was shaking. Silas Renshaw turned his head and he looked at his wife for one moment in the cold, quiet courtroom. He looked at her as if he was seeing her for the very first time. Miss Ferguson lifted her last document. Item 10, Your Honor. The defense respectfully submits an additional charge. Conspiracy to commit homicide. Last night, 3 armed men hired through a Denver cousin of Mrs. Cordelia Renshaw attempted to enter the home of my client, Mrs. Adeline Calloway, with instructions to abduct 2 infants and to murder my client and her husband. 2 of those men are dead. One is in custody at this moment in the cell at the back of Sheriff Hawthorne's office. He has in the last 4 hours signed a sworn statement in front of Captain Owen Pike of the Territorial Militia, naming Mrs. Cordelia Renshaw as the person who paid him $300 to undertake this attempt. Cordelia stood up. Her chair clattered backward. "You miserable little fool," she said. To Silas, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. I told you 3 years ago. Burn every one of those letters, every single one. Read them yourself if you must, but burn them after. And what did I find when I went to clean out that drawer last August? 47 letters from a Pittsburgh widow with a careful schoolteacher's hand, and every single one of them mentioning the twins. Every single one of them filed neatly in your desk like a man who could not be bothered to do one thing he was asked. You stupid, stupid man. You ruined this, not me. You. Silas Renshaw did not move. He did not blink. He just looked at her with his mouth slightly open. For one moment longer he looked at her. Then his face changed, the way a man's face changes when he stops being someone's husband and starts being himself. He turned slowly back to Judge Holden. "Your Honor," he said, "Mr. Renshaw, I would like to make a statement, under oath, about my wife, about what she has done, about what I have known, and about what I have failed to do." Judge Holden looked at him for a long moment. "Bailiff," he said quietly, "take Mrs. Renshaw into custody. Now." A deputy moved to the prosecution table. Cordelia did not resist. She did not look at her husband. She walked out of the courtroom with the deputy on her arm and her chin lifted, as if she were leaving a tea party. She did not turn around. She did not look at Addie even once. That was the last time Adeline Calloway saw the woman who had murdered her husband's first wife and tried to murder her. By 2 in the afternoon, Judge Holden had dismissed every charge against Addie. By 3, he had issued a bench warrant for Bartholomew Whitfield on the charge of perjury. By 4, he had granted Adeline Calloway sole and permanent legal guardianship of Ruth Henderson and Samuel Henderson, with Jonah Calloway named as her guardian partner by marriage. By 5, Addie was sitting in the wagon between Jonah and the basket where the babies slept. She had cried once. In the courtroom hallway, in Mabel's arms. Not before, not since. She was very quiet on the ride home. The road climbed, she held the basket steady on the bench beside her. She watched the pines come close and recede. She watched the white teeth of the Wind River Range catch the late winter sun. Halfway up the mountain, Jonah stopped the team. He looked at her. "Are you with me?" he said. The same words she had said to him in the kitchen the night Ruth lay sick. "I am with you," she said. He nodded once, then he flicked the reins. The horses started forward again. The wagon rolled toward Iron Creek Ridge as the sun set behind them. That night, when the babies were asleep and the chores were done, and Mabel had gone home to town, and Levi and Asa were in their rooms in the main house, Addie wrapped the sky-blue shawl Jonah had left her on her first night around her shoulders, and she walked across the yard. She walked to the small cabin that had been Cora's home. She unlocked the door. She had not entered it as anything but a tenant for 2 months and 20 days. She entered it now as something else. She lit a single candle on the table. She sat down in the small, straight-backed chair where Cora must have sat in the evenings. She looked around the small room. She said quietly, "Hello, Cora." She said, "Thank you for letting me borrow this place." She said, "I am going to take very good care of him, and I am going to find out everything you knew, and I am going to make sure no one else ever ends up like Mary Sue. I promise you." She blew out the candle. She walked back across the yard. When she opened the door of the main house, Jonah was standing on the stairs, in his shirt sleeves, waiting for her. He did not ask where she had been. He held out his hand. She took it. She climbed the stairs with him to the room they had shared for one strange, chaste week. He closed the door behind them. 6 months later, in the courthouse in Cheyenne, a circuit jury of 12 men took 2 hours to convict Cordelia Brewster Renshaw of 3 counts of homicide in the first degree. Cora Calloway, Daniel Calloway, Mary Sue Holloway. They took an additional 30 minutes to convict her of attempted homicide, of Adeline Calloway and Jonah Calloway, and the conspiracy charges related to the kidnapping attempt on Ruth and Samuel Henderson. Judge Theodore Holden sentenced her to life imprisonment at the Wyoming Territorial Penitentiary at hard labor with no possibility of parole. She did not appeal. She sat very straight in her hard wooden chair while the sentence was read. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at Silas, who had received 8 years in the same penitentiary for his role as accessory, and for the deaths of 3 of the other mail-order brides whose names were still unspoken in Eagle Rock. She did not look at Bartholomew Whitfield, who had been extradited to Pennsylvania to face 7 years for fraud and perjury. She looked only at the judge, and she nodded once when he finished, as if she were accepting a delivery. She was put on a wagon to the prison the same afternoon. She lived another 9 years inside those walls. She died of pneumonia in 1887. No one came to claim her body. The first warm afternoon of May that spring of 1879 came on a Tuesday. Jonah and Addie walked together to the cottonwood tree at the edge of the meadow. 2 small headstones stood there side by side, carved by Levi the second winter after Cora's death. He had taken 3 months to do them properly. He had cut every letter himself. Cora Bellamy Calloway, 1849 to 1876, beloved wife of Jonah Calloway. She made what was bitter sweet. Daniel John Calloway, 5 months, 1876, held briefly, loved forever. The wild flowers had come up early on the south side of the meadow that year. Indian paintbrush and lupine and small white anemones. Addie had picked a bunch of them on the walk-up and tied them with a piece of yellow ribbon. She laid them at the foot of Cora's stone. Jonah stood beside her with his hat in his hand. After a long moment, he spoke. "I thought when I came here," he said, "I would feel her here. I never have. I have come and stood, and I have known she was somewhere else. I have never felt her here. Until—" He did not finish. "Until," Addie said. "Quiet. Until you started carrying her notebook. Until you started using her drying racks. Until I heard you humming yesterday morning in the kitchen and I realized it was a song I had not heard in 3 years." Addie did not know that song. She had not realized she had been humming. "I did not mean to," she said. "No," he said. "I know. That is what made it. She was always here. She was just waiting for someone to be ready to listen." Addie put her hand on the top of Cora's stone. She said, "She was a good woman. She was. And so are you." Jonah turned to her. He took her hand. He pressed it to his face. "Adeline Calloway," he said. "Yes, I love you. I have loved you since the day you stitched my wrist in the cabin. I did not know it for a long time. I have known it for 2 months. I should have said so. You have shown it for 2 months. I should have said it too. You are saying it now. I am." They walked back down the meadow, with the wildflowers behind them, and the babies waiting on the porch with Asa and Levi and the May sun warm on their shoulders. Asa Calloway married Beth Green in the same little white church on the first Sunday of October. Beth was Mabel's granddaughter. She had come to Eagle Rock 2 years earlier to help her grandmother run the boarding house. She was 23. She had brown eyes and a quick laugh. She had been quietly in love with Asa Calloway since the day she saw him singing to her grandmother's calico cat from the back porch. They had courted properly for 16 months. Mabel had not allowed it any other way. The church was full this time. Addie sat in the front pew with Jonah on one side and Ruth on her lap and Samuel on Jonah's lap. Both babies were 18 months old now. They had begun to walk in the spring. They had begun to talk in the summer. Samuel called Jonah Pa. He had not been taught to. He had picked it up from somewhere. Levi stood up with Asa as his witness. Levi wore a suit and a clean collar, and a small white flower in his buttonhole that Beth had pinned there herself an hour before the ceremony. Levi did not exactly smile through the ceremony, but he stood with his shoulders open and his chin up, which for Levi was the equivalent of dancing. Mabel sat in the second pew with her hands folded in her lap. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Mabel let out the smallest, most satisfied sigh in the history of grandmothers. Ursa picked Beth up off the floor. He spun her once. He set her down. He kissed her. Ursa was not embarrassed to kiss his bride in front of the whole town. After the ceremony, there was a supper at Iron Creek Ridge. Tables set up out under the cottonwoods. 3 sides of beef and 2 roasted hogs and a long line of pies on a plank table covered with a clean white cloth. Levi played the harmonica, and a man named Hollis Webb played the fiddle, and people who could dance danced, and people who could not danced anyway. The whole town came up the mountain that day. Garrett Hawthorne danced with Mabel. Reverend Caldwell danced with the schoolmistress. Captain Owen Pike danced with Addie, slow and careful in his old cavalry boots. And just past sunset, when the lamps were lit and the babies had been carried inside to sleep, Jonah took Addie's hand and led her away from the lamplight and out into the meadow where the wildflowers had come back for a second time that year because the rain had been good. He stopped in the middle of the meadow. "Addie," he said. "Jonah, there is something I have wanted to ask you for 2 months. I have not known how, so I am just going to ask it. All right. I would like to have another child with you. Our child, if you would, if it would not. He could not finish. She did not need him to. She took his face in both her hands. She said, "Yes, Jonah. Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Yes." The years passed at Iron Creek Ridge, the way good years pass. Quickly, when you were inside them. Heavy with weight when you looked back. Jonah expanded the main house. He added 4 bedrooms and a long covered porch and a separate kitchen wing for Addie, because she had quietly mentioned one evening in the spring of 1884 that she would not mind a window that faced east. He built it himself, every board, every nail, the same way he had built the cabin for Cora a long lifetime ago. The cabin Cora had lived in became something different over the years. It became the schoolhouse first. Addie taught reading and figures in there to the children of the 4 nearest ranches 3 afternoons a week from the fall of 1880, until the day a proper one-room schoolhouse was built down the valley in 1883. After that, the cabin became Addie's herb room. She filled the shelves with the jars and the labeled pressed leaves and the careful notes that grew thicker and thicker every year. People came up Iron Creek for her medicine from 60 miles away by the end. She did not charge. They left what they could on the porch and walked away. Ruth and Samuel grew. They grew tall. They grew strong. They grew curious. Ruth had her mother's careful hand and her aunt's quiet determination. She read everything in the house by the time she was 9. By the time she was 12, she was helping Addie keep the herb room records. Samuel was different. Samuel was quiet like Jonah and watchful like Levi, and he had inherited from somewhere a deep love of stone and earth. He spent the summer of his 14th year working a small claim with an old prospector down toward South Pass. He came home at the end of August with a piece of silver ore the size of his fist, and the look on his face of a young man who had found his calling. Addie and Jonah had 3 more children of their own. The first was a girl. They named her Cora. They did not announce why. They did not need to. Mabel sat in the front pew at the baptism and wept for 10 minutes without making a single sound. Cora was followed 2 years later by another girl named Margaret, after Addie's lost sister, and 4 years after Margaret by a boy named after no one in particular, because Addie said she had named all the dead she could carry. And now she was going to name a child for the future. They called him Wyatt. He was loud. He was fast. He had Asa's mouth and Jonah's eyes and Addie's stubborn chin. He was the favorite of his great-aunt Mabel from the day he was born. Asa and Beth had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. They built a house a quarter mile from the main ranch, and they raised cattle and apples and trouble. Asa never lost his singing voice. The Calloway Brothers' supper-time hymn was a thing the whole valley could hear when the wind was right. Levi never married. Levi never seemed to mind not marrying. Levi was the uncle every child in the valley wanted as their own. He carved them toys. He taught them to track. He taught them to whittle. He taught them never to lie to a horse. He lived to be 69. He died in his sleep in the spring of 1917, with 3 of his nieces and nephews holding his hands, and an entire valley of mourners walking up the mountain road 3 days later to lay him beside Cora and Daniel under the cottonwood. Mabel Green died in 1903 at the age of 84. She had run her boarding house herself until she was 80. Beth and Asa moved her into their guest room for her last 4 years. She died holding Beth's hand. Addie was on the other side of the bed, with her own hand on Mabel's forehead. The last word Mabel said was, Adeline. Like a small good word. Like a name a person says when she is glad about something. Captain Owen Pike outlived them all by improbable margins. He still sat on the porch of Iron Creek Ridge every Sunday afternoon and told the same 6 stories to anyone who would listen. The smallest grandchildren listened, because the stories had become legends. The older ones listened because they loved him. Cordelia. Renshaw died in prison in 1887. Silas Renshaw was released in 1886 and walked out of Wyoming for a small mining town in Oregon, and was never heard from again. Bartholomew Whitfield died of a stroke in a Pittsburgh boarding house in 1891. 2 of the unclaimed mail-order brides, whose stories Cora had begun to gather, went on to write books. The books were used as evidence in similar fraud cases across the Western Territories for 2 decades. The shawl Jonah Calloway had left on his second wife's porch in December of 1878 stayed in a cedar chest at the foot of their bed for 41 years. Addie wore it on cold mornings when the rheumatism in her shoulders bothered her. She wore it on the day she sat in the church and watched Ruth marry a young man from a ranch on the south side of South Pass. She wore it the day Samuel left for the Colorado School of Mines with the silver ore from his 14th year still in his pocket. She wore it on the morning of her 65th birthday. She was sitting in her rocking chair on the long-covered porch at Iron Creek Ridge. The sun was coming up over the Wind River Range. The aspen on the south slope had turned the color of new copper. The Calloway dogs were sleeping on the boards beside her chair. Jonah came out of the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. He was 74 years old. He moved slower than he had moved at 33. His hair had gone all the way to silver in the last few years. His eyes were still the color of whiskey held up to a fire. He still stood up when she came into a room. He had never stopped. He set the coffee cup on the small table beside her rocker. He sat down in the rocker beside her. The 2 of them rocked for a long time without speaking. The valley below was full of life that morning. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys. Ruth's husband was bringing in the cattle from the upper pasture. Beth was carrying a basket toward Mabel's old herb plot, which Addie had restored 4 years back. The smallest of Beth's grandchildren, a 6-year-old named Walter, was chasing a chicken with the particular concentration of a boy who has not yet realized chickens are faster than boys. Addie sipped her coffee. She thought about the morning 41 years ago, when she had stepped off a train at the Eagle Rock Depot, with 2 babies in her arms, and a man in a long black coat had told her, loud enough for the whole town to hear, that he would not have her. She thought about the way the wind had come through her wool. She thought about how she had stood there because she had not known what else to do. And she thought about the woman in the gray coat who had crossed the platform and taken her elbow. And the man with whiskey eyes who had come down from the mountain because he could not let it pass. And the brother who had taught her to shoot. And the brother who had taught her to track. And the babies who had grown up into a school teacher and a mining engineer. And the 3 children of her own who slept in the bedrooms above her head. She thought about the promise she had made to her sister Margaret on a hot August afternoon in a small Pittsburgh bedroom. She had kept it. Jonah reached across the small table. He took her hand. His hand was warm. It was the same hand he had laid on her knee in the kitchen of the main house on the night he had asked her to marry him. He squeezed once. "Good morning, Mrs. Calloway." "Good morning, Mr. Calloway." He looked out at the valley. The morning sun caught his face. He smiled. The same way he had smiled the day they walked out of the little white church on the south end of Eagle Rock, with the snow stopped, and the babies bundled up, and the world cracked open with possibility. "You know what I think about every morning when I sit out here," he said. "What?" That you came up that mountain road on a wagon bench, with a basket of 2 babies between us, and you treated my dead wife's house like it was a holy place, and you said you would treat it the way Cora would have wanted to find it, every day, for as long as you were inside it. He turned to her. His eyes were wet. You kept that promise too, Addie. She did not answer with words. She just lifted his hand and she pressed it against her cheek. The sun came up, the kitchen behind them filled with the sound of children. The whole valley below them woke into the simple noise of a life that had been built. Plank by plank, word by word, day by day, by 2 people who came to this house broken and decided together to be made whole. Behind them, on a high shelf inside the kitchen wing of the long ranch house, sat a small leather journal, carefully labeled in 2 different careful schoolteachers' hands. Cora Calloway, Adeline Calloway. The Healing Book of Iron Creek Ridge, begun 1874. It was still being added to. It always would be.